So my article is the growth of high-stakes testing in the USA. The publication of A Nation at Risk in 1983 blamed education for the economic problems of the 1980s. We've talked about this in class. It also called for more uniform education policies focused on raising standards, implementation of standardized tests, and holding students and teachers accountable. So after A Nation at Risk, one of the results was No Child Left Behind, which we're all very familiar with. But basically what it says is every state's required to develop standards, standardized tests, and accountability systems. It mandates that students have the option to transfer from schools with low test scores to those with higher test scores. Um, what I found interesting is that these three rationales that No Child Left Behind wanted to accomplish. Reforms are necessary within an increasingly globalized economy, reduce educational inequality, increase assessment objectivity, and we'll talk more about those in just a minute. What it's actually done, though, is it's shifted power from teachers and parents and local communities and given it to the state and federal levels. It has increased inequality and it does not provide objectivity. And we'll talk more about those things momentarily. This study is actually a study done from the UK, and they mostly looked at New York and Texas. So, just a little background, there was a radical overhaul in the 90s in New York. Secondary students had to pass 5 standardized tests. They eradicated programs at innovative secondary schools, programs that were based on creativity, culturalism, and things like that. And then primary students are required to pass 4 tests. In New York, the aggregated test scores were published by the New York Department of Education and publicized in the media, which we are very familiar with. But it's no big surprise that the school scores closely correspond to the average family income of the school students. So if they were primarily white and upper middle class, they had better test scores. If they were minorities and low socioeconomic students, then they had lower test scores. Now, in Texas, the reform started in the 1980s. Graduation became dependent on passing English and math exams. In the 90s, the graduation criterion increased, and now they had to pass tests in math, reading, and writing. And then grades 3 through 8 were required to test. Continuing with Texas, schools are held accountable for students' learning by test scores. Schools with high ratings are eligible for cash awards. Schools with low ratings are sanctioned or closed. The first tests, TOS, were fully implemented in 1994. And obviously, we know that there were other standardized testing that we did. I remember doing ITBS, or the Iowa Test of Basic Skills. But this is the time that this is what we're stuck with now. This is when it started. Now, going back to No Child Left Behind, it was signed into law by George W. In 2002. And one of the things about No Child Left Behind is the AYP, the annual yearly progress. If one of your subgroup fails, then the whole school fails. And that is Y subgroups, minorities, ELLs, you're disabled, all of those are so important. It also says that if a school is in 2 years in a row of failure, they're identified as in need of improvement. Parents can be given the option to transfer. 3 years, schools must provide supplemental services, meaning they have to provide tutoring at their expense with outside tutors and some other supplemental services. 4 years, school staff can be replaced, outside experts to advise the school, and then after 5 years of failing, they can lose funding. Personnel is replaced, receiver or trustee can be appointed, and they can even abolish or restructure the school district. So all of this stuff that I've mentioned previously is stuff that we know. But this is where it really kind of started getting a little under my skin. Education Secretary under Bush, Rodney Page, says that, or said at the time, NCLB builds on the goals of the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. The quote, the education achievement gap is a civil rights issue of our time. Quote, it fulfills the Brown v. Board of Education for equal education opportunity. And he and also from legislators from New York have said teachers have not rigorously enforced standards nor accurately assessed students, therefore covering up their own and the students' failures. And teachers have relied too often on their own assessment, so test scores will also benefit them by providing teachers with independent information about each child's strengths and weaknesses. This kind of ticked me off because I know what the kids' weaknesses and strengths are because I'm with them every day and I assess daily. Now, when I read this is where I got a little hot under the collar. Back in New York, the Chancellor of Education and the Commissioner of Education for New York said that we need curriculum standards and standardized tests because teachers and administrators cannot be trusted to assess objectively and accurately. I say baloney. Now, in order to not have this presentation be 3 hours long, I had to cut out a lot of stuff, but these are the consequences of high stakes testing after looking at it objectively, or from the UK, I guess. Tests are poorly constructed, misleading, or have incorrect questions. We know that to be true. I found mistakes myself. Grading over or understates student learning, preaching to the choir. ELLs used to have the highest diploma earning, or were the highest diploma earning minority until No Child Left Behind. Now they have the highest dropout rate. That is a shame. Standards are changed depending on the need of graduation rates. If they need graduation rates to go up, they will make the test easier. If they want them to go down or they feel comfortable, then they will make the tests harder. And then when they go back down, then they'll ease up on the test again. Adequate yearly progress typically discriminates against schools serving minorities and lower socioeconomic students. AYP does not measure scores per se. They use a minimum yearly threshold. So if a school meets the yearly minimum threshold, they can still completely fail all of the tests and still be graded as a passing school. Texas actually lowered expectations after No Child Left Behind on standardized testing. Non-tested subjects are often shortchanged or ignored, for instance, fourth grade, science, social studies. And we take part of their time to help us with math and with um, writing and reading. Retention rates have increased. A lot of times, especially for those SSI years, they will retain or they'll retain a year before the EOC courses. So it doesn't matter what we feel about it, it's not going away. These numbers are from Texas alone. Education testing systems is this is the current contract with Texas, $280 million over 4 years to be paid out by Texas to them. Pearson, this was the last contract that was awarded to them, $500 million over 5 years. I read a statistic that said it cost approximately $50 million just in teacher pay and paraprofessional pay for one test on one day. So upwards of $1 billion per year that's paid out by Texas for standardized testing. I saw this little quote: if we differentiate lessons, why do we give standardized tests? I don't know what else to say about that, because standardized test goes against everything that we want to accomplish with our students. And here's my source from the British Educational Journal. And I added this little cartoon. I'll just leave that right there for you to ponder on. I think now I know what my position paper is going to be about. Y'all have a good night.